First and foremost, thanks to the council, again, and the mayor for your leadership in this area. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss publicly with all of you, our community, and our team, the COVID-19 impacts on our budget. This will be update number one, and I'll explain why number one second here. As the mayor stated earlier, when this all started to occur in our community, we quickly organized, and when we brought our virtual EOC online, we created a strategy that we've really focused on throughout this, and that is to ensure community lifelines, and you can see the objectives below. This also applies to how we as an organization, we as a community financially work through this, and so I think it's important that we always realize that we have some overarching strategy and objectives that we're trying to work towards in regards to this. Presentation itself, I want to just quickly hit on the adopted budget as our starting point, and then spend the majority of time on our revenue impacts, while at the same time touching base on what we believe is a sound CIP strategy, as well as just a high-level overview of strategies to address our revenue impacts, with more information to follow at May 4th in regards to that portion of this. As I said about the EOC, the council also has your adopted foundational principles, which the reason it's important to have these is times like this. Well, we need to apply what you see as the most important, highest priorities on an ongoing basis for our community. And so as we go through this, we also use these as a guide as we work forward in addressing some of the financial impacts. Important for you and everyone to understand, as we go through this, you'll see ranges, and the ranges are there because we had to make some assumptions, just like basically every government organization, and public and private nonprofits are doing. What are the assumptions they're using to look at the financial impacts? And so first one is having the shutdown phase start to end in early summer, that this will be an extended recovery period. We're not going to go back to normal in a short time. It's going to take potentially many months and even a year or more to get into the financial recovery as well as public health recovery. And then financially, that right now, no significant impacts to our adopted state and federal aid. The budget that the council adopted for 2020 is $587 million. As a reminder, we now reference the number that includes the entire city, including RPU. And I circled on the left there operations in red, because what we're talking about primarily is impacts to operating budgets, though we will hit on the capital improvement side. But I wanted to make sure the council realized we're looking at that $343 million worth of operations as we start to work through the numbers. So the next dozen slides or so are really focused on the revenue impacts. And I will spend some time in each of these. I'm trying not to read each of the slides, but I think it's important for the council to realize what's on each slide and why it's there. So at the beginning, each of the slides, when you previewed it, you saw a meter or a gauge, and it's the three that are on the slide here. The one on the left is the low or no impact, which is less than 3% reduction. So you see the needle is far to the left on the green. The medium impact we defined as a 3 to 10% reduction in revenue, which is the straight up arrow to the yellow or gold. And then the high impact is greater than 10%, which is the arrow to the right towards the blue. To start with, I showed you the $587 million, that's for all our funds combined, $343 million of that for operations. When you look at all our funds combined, we'd say there's a high impact to our revenues of a range from $17 to $28 million revenue reduction. At this time now, I'll spend some time going into each of the fund areas and then specific revenues that we generate as a city. So slide before you now shows the four major areas. The general fund, this is the fund that funds police and fire and our administration, the city clerk operations, and many others. We see as a range of $3.5 to $7.5 million revenue reduction. We have defined this as a medium impact, within the 3 different gauges that we're using. To the upper right then is Rochester Public Utilities. So both the water and the electricity, once again, see the medium impact of $3.6 million to $5.7 million. The lower left is our enterprise funds, and we'll get into these, of $4.7 to $6 million revenue reduction, which we say have a high impact. And just like your enterprise funds, your special revenue funds are $5.2 million to $9.2 million revenue impact, which we say is a high impact. What I'm going to do now is walk through each of those revenue areas, starting with property taxes. So property taxes is a general fund revenue, and it's our primary general fund revenue, as the council knows in your conversations about the disproportionate amount of revenue that we generate for the general fund through the property taxes. Though in this case, that is a positive thing, because we're estimating that we will receive close to the entire amount of just under $80 million in our share of the property tax revenues. We have not seen any reports to date that are showing a decline or even a significant decline in your property tax revenues. Obviously, like everything else, this can change over time, but right now our estimates are showing receiving close to the full amount of $79.4 million. One thing that's important, tomorrow at the county board meeting, they will be discussing formally deferring penalties till July 15th. So still having them due on April 15th, which was just passed, obviously, but the penalties would not occur until after July 15th. I want to thank the county for working with us on this. Dale Martinson and others have been engaged with Mark Krupski, Heidi Welsh, and others in regards to making sure that as the funds are received, that the city will get our share. And that's important because this really is a cash flow issue for us, as you can expect. Having half of that, about $40 million, we typically receive soon. If that's delayed, we need to make sure that we are adequately managing our cash. I want to thank Finance, Rachel and Dale and others for what they are doing to ensure that we have the cash necessary to pay our bills as well. And then because of this, there's the potential for increased delinquencies, and we would continue to work through with the county on those. So that's a low or no impact. So conversely is your hotel or motel tax, which the county has, or the council, excuse me, has spent a significant amount of time on over the course of the last year and a half plus, as we've looked through the new operating and governing model for the MCC. So you're well aware of this. This one we see having significant, the greatest impact overall is a reduction of anywhere from $2.5 to $4 million, depending on when the market really returns for the Mayo Civic Center and our customer base there. This is upwards of 80% of the general fund reduction. One of the key things that the council needs to know in the community is we have an obligation for our debt service payment there. We believe that is not in jeopardy because of what we've been collecting. And so that is our number one priority, though, that the debt service payment will be paid first. And then as we come back with different ways to address this, we will have to work through that with the city council on this impact to our organization and community. Next one are licenses, permits, and charges for services. Once again, general fund, anywhere from $500,000 to $1.7 million in revenue reduction. The 3 primary areas is our city clerk operation, building safety, as well as community development. And so these are really those that our customers are paying directly to us for the services that we're receiving. And so we are seeing some impacts in those areas as well. And that's a medium impact. And then another general fund revenue is what we call the pilot, or the payment in lieu of taxes. This is paid by our enterprise funds. And as you saw when I showed the meters overall for enterprise funds, they are having a high impact. And so this is based on a formula of their revenues. And so as those decrease, so does the payment to the city general fund in this area. I'm now going to move out of the general fund and touch base on some of the special revenue funds. The first is Rochester International Airport, or RST, a special revenue fund. We see a high impact, as you might suspect, in watching the news and understand what's happening to our economy. Flights have basically come to a standstill. It's my understanding somewhere in the 5%, maybe 10%, but 5% of what has occurred around the country is now happening in terms of flights. So this is severely impacting RST as well in all areas of our operations. And so we'll touch on ways to address this a little later in the PowerPoint. Recreation is also a special revenue fund. The majority of the funds are generated through property taxes, though recreation does generate revenue through golf and the rec centers and our programs. And so we're anticipating a $1.1 to $2.9 million revenue reduction. Once again, a high impact. And the ability to keep it on the lower end is really our ability to open golf courses, recreation centers, and some of our revenue generating areas, and then having a community willing to pay for those services. As you saw, what I mentioned earlier in the meeting today is we will be able to open our golf courses slowly and at a slower pace than normal, though this will all help in some of the revenue generation, given that people will come back to the courses in golf with the social distancing. So some of that has already changed since we put this together. Transit, high impact once again, another special revenue fund, anywhere from just under $2 million to just under $4 million. Somewhat like the airlines, another form of transportation. We've seen significant reduction in ridership here and are currently operating fare-free, as the council and community are aware, to ensure that this essential service is being provided to our community, while at the same time making sure that our drivers, as well as those riding the buses, are safe while doing so. And so going to operating fare-free, we thought was the most responsible way of handling that, but it is going to have an economic impact as well. Now I'm going to move into our enterprise funds. And so the first one is parking. Once again, a high impact in terms of revenue loss, anywhere from $1.8 to $3 million revenue reduction. I wanted to give you the percent in this one. This is upwards of 25 to 45% of what we typically see in this enterprise fund. We've suspended meter enforcement, which means suspended the majority of the payments in our meters, as well as for the current time, our ramp contract parking is suspended upon request by our customers, and we will be discussing how long we continue that. But once again, like anything else, this has a dramatic impact on our revenues for that fund. The sewer enterprise fund, about a $3 million revenue reduction, and what's unique about this one is it's not just all due to COVID-19. As you can see on the slide, about 2/3 of it is related to some of the recent closings that we have experienced here from Seneca, Kemps, and Ampe. But there is about a 35% of that is still related to COVID-19. And so as we work forward with addressing the issue, we'll obviously be addressing this comprehensively and not just the COVID-19, but also making sure that we look at what's happening to the entire fund due to the closings, as well as some of our important businesses that we've had here in our community. So that concludes going through each of the funds. If you allow, we'll just go through a few more slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions of those, and I can come back to them. So the capital improvement program is a significant part of our budget, upwards of $190 million for this year. Some key projects are the runway reconstruction, the North Service Center station that you have in items under your consent agenda today, Heart of the City, and others. And so I just wanted to frame this up so you understood where some of the projects were. Same time, from a funding standpoint, we have a very diverse funding. I believe we have somewhere upwards of 32 different funding sources for all these projects. So as you might suspect, it's not quite as simple as some of the other things I showed you. Once again, looking at what the federal government, what Destination Medical Center, some of the bonds that we sell will bring to the projects. So the guidance that we've given to the entire organization is that all projects that have not started need to first go through a conversation with administration and to have some guidance provided by what revenue sources are they using, which ones are impacted by COVID-19, are we able to leverage external funding from the federal government, the state government, or our partners, and will the project have a positive impact on our local economy as we help to work through that. And so prior to anything arriving at the council for further direction, administration will vet each of the projects to make sure that we believe that they can still move forward or not at that point. Then we thought it's also important as members of the community talk about, well, why would we continue our projects? Heart of the City is a good example, and others. As I said, we have 32 different funding sources. There's many restrictions on those. We typically cannot take funds from capital projects and apply them to cover operating losses in our revenues that we talked about. We believe that they can help with our local economy, help the construction industry, as well as having some of the projects ready. What's known as shovel ready is important. And so as different opportunities come forward from the federal government, we too are ready to respond and hopefully be able to capitalize on some of the stimulus funds or other funds that may become available for that. So now I just want to touch base on addressing some of our revenue impacts and some of the high-level ways that we see the council's opportunities that you have to accomplish this. So the first one is the use of your contingency funds. As you know, every year in your general fund, you have a long practice of funding of approximately $1 million in that to address things that come up throughout the year. And this would be a prime example of something that's come up that it's appropriate to look at those funds. It's obviously appropriate to look at ways to reduce our 2020 expenses, to look at what fund balances you have, and then to look at how we can obtain funding from other sources related to COVID-19, primarily from the state and through the federal government. To date, it's important for the council and the community to understand that we have done things, even though this is our first budget update. I want to thank all of the departments for their hard work in working through this, and our finance team and others for their efforts. And one of the things we immediately did as we understood the impacts of COVID-19 is we put on a personnel hiring freeze, and we've also delayed the hire of many other positions. In total, this equates to about $2.25 million of estimated savings if we were to continue to hold these positions open throughout the course of this year. We have looked at the CIP. You fund about $5.5 million of that tax levy support for the $190 million CIP. So we've looked at a few ways of saving about $250,000 there. The departments, department heads, the teammates in the departments have really done a great job of coming up with plans that are non-related to our teammates and personnel, another $4 to $5 million. And then we have a general fund contingency in the range of $5 to $8 million, depending on the CDBG reimbursement. That's a item that is in your consent agenda tonight or today. And it's also important to understand that the team is working hard. We're having several communications with the federal government in multiple areas. Heather Corcoran's doing a great job, as well as teammates in our transit area, in our airport, and others. And so we're happy to report that we believe there's a very high probability that we will be receiving funds from the Federal Aviation Administration. Once again, there's a consent item today to apply for about $2.5 million. Been working with the Federal Transportation Administration, FTA, for both operations and capital support in our transit area. That could be upwards of $7 million, many variables to that. The police department has done a good job of obtaining $80,000 from the Department of Justice related to PPE and some emergency management. And we're continuing monitoring and, I think as importantly, advocating for additional funding at the state and federal level to assist us and many other cities with ways to address the direct impacts. And it's really not just on the city's budget, but it's what is the impact to the community because of reduced budgets that we have. And last, just to talk about your fund balances, these are just a handful of the fund balances that you have in the middle column. And we believe there's $10 million plus in the bill of funding potentially to be used for this. You know, we always talk about the rainy day. Well, this is it. This is the storm. We are a AAA rated city and community of only, a few handfuls around the country. And so it's a proud thing to have a AAA rating. It's important for us how we secure our debt and other things. And this is the time for us to look at these to make sure that is there available funds that we can use to offset a need, immediate need like this. And obviously, it's important to realize that we can't use all the fund balance because we know we need those for plans that we have in place, but they are available for the council to consider. So in summary, anywhere from $17 to $28 million revenue loss in all funds, identified $27 to $36 million in ways to address it at this point. And that is what we would look at bringing back to you at the May 4th council meeting with a recommended funding strategy to address the revenues and then receive direction at that point from you. With that, I'll turn it back to Council President Staver, and I appreciate everyone's patience with me going through this in a little more detail. Thank you.